Hey, hey.
Sweet. Okay.
Oh, how do you? Hey, you have to unmute.
That helps. That'll really help the interview, won't it? So good to see you, Carol. And this is
Andrik,
Andrik. Andrik,
yes.
nice to meet you. Nice to meet you.
Nice
Thank you
meeting
so
you,
much.
Tanisha. Thank you for inviting us.
Oh my gosh, thank you for hopping on the call. I had a crazy week at work and some technical difficulties and some clear misunderstandings, but doggone it,
Hey, it
figured it
happens.
all out.
We're trying to change the
Um,
world. It's a busy job, you know. It can get to your head, so no worries. Alright. All right.
that's right. That's right. Um,
I can't hear you. I don't know if you're speaking.
yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, now I can.
Okay, great, great. Well, it's one, so I guess we can just dive in. I want to be really sensitive to your time and just thank you again for granting us the opportunity to kind of showcase you and your organization on World Refugee Day. This has been a fabulous learning experience for me, and just hoping to share some of those insights with our audience once we broadcast this. So I am recording this so that we can broadcast it to our social media channels later, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. So I'll just, Carol knows me, but I'll introduce myself for our viewing audience and for Andrik. So my name is Tanisha Landry. I am a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, of the Tau Beta Omega chapter. That's a chapter that's located in Marina Del Rey. So we kind of service that area and surrounding areas with our community service. Every member in the chapter, you know, this is our service. It's our commitment to our organization, and it's our service to the community. We all have other full-time jobs, and this is just what we do. It's a part of our lifelong journey. Just a very quick recap. You know, Alpha Kappa Alpha was founded in 1908 at Howard University in Washington, D.C., which is a historically Black college, and that was during a time that Black Americans weren't readily able to achieve higher education and certainly weren't permitted into predominantly white institutions. And so we were the first sorority that was founded at Howard University with the purpose of elevating the stature of women, ensuring the scholastic achievement of women. There are 5 basic tenets. The one that I think that is most relevant for this call today is to be of service to all mankind. And so that credo has just kind of followed us from 1908 to today. And we have several targets, like several international targets. The target that we're focusing on today is global impact, and that happens to be the committee that I'm chair of. So that's why I get to hang out with y'all today. So the Global Impact Committee engages in a variety of events to raise awareness and to get the community involved in supporting a variety of initiatives. And like I said, you know, for this one, we really just wanted to raise awareness about World Refugee Day, what it is, and how we can get involved. Oh, hi. We have our vice president on the call. Her name is Sauda. Thank you so much for joining, Sauda. So yes, that's what the global committee's initiatives are. Um, so we really, like I said, we really just want to raise awareness about program for torture victims, what it is that you do, especially on today, World Refugee Day, and go from there. So here's how I got to meet Carol. Last December, I just became chair of this committee. I was, you know, appointed or requested, I volunteered in December. And so all of January, I was doing research, trying to figure out who out here in this area can our chapter partner with to do this service for the community? And specifically, you know, we really want to support people of color, like refugees of color, asylum seekers of color, and just make sure any unmet needs are met. And of all of the organizations I reached out to and that previous committee chairs I've reached out to, Carol is the one that responded. And Carol and I had a great sit down at a local cafe, and she enlightened me. And so I'm just hoping to share some of that enlightenment and information today. So that's how I got to meet Carol. So with that, Carol, hello.
Nice to see
Introduce
you again.
yourself and tell us. So always lovely to see you. So why don't you introduce yourself and tell us about your role with Program for Torture Victims?
Okay, so my name is Carol Gomez, and I'm the clinical director at the Program for Torture Victims. And my colleague here, Andrique, is joining me in this forum so that both they and I can share, you know, the experiences of being a community member at PTV. Let's see, what were your other questions?
How long have you been with PTV? And what pulled you there?
So I've been at PTV now for about 5 years, and what pulled me there? Long story. It's kind of hard to like summarize it in like 2 seconds, but I'm an immigrant myself and an immigrant of color, and my life experience has been shaped by my race and my skin color. So ever since I was probably about age 4 or even maybe younger, I was very aware of what that means to have darker skin in the country that I came from, where my folks were migrant workers. They migrated from South India. They didn't necessarily migrate. We were a British colony, both India and Malaysia, where I'm from. And workers were brought from India to Malaysia to support the British regime and the industries there. So my dad came as kind of in both in the farm working, but also like administrative. So he was sort of doing farm work, but also doing the administrative part of being on the land there. I don't know a whole ton about my dad's work history because he never really spoke about it, and there's a huge age gap between me and my dad. He was 58 when I was born, and there's also a language barrier because I grew up speaking English and Malay, and he grew up speaking the South Indian language of Malayalam. So my household was also multilingual, and sometimes we didn't communicate so well with each other because of the generation age gap, and because by the time I was born, the language of the country was and schooling was so different from the language of my father. He never quite integrated in that way because he didn't pick up English or Malay that well. So he sort of stayed in his own ethnic sort of community. So
his comfortable space.
Yeah, it's comfortable place, and you know, till the day he died. So, and as a migrant community of lower economic status in the context of the country and of dark skin, my community was subjected to very similar experiences that Black folks here face on the day-to-day. In terms of the type of racism, the name calling, the isolation, the economic disparities, the health disparities, the lack of access to loans and housing and jobs and all the things. So from a very early age, I was very aware of that, but my family didn't have language to speak about it. And I faced it and processed it on my own as a child. My sisters were also a lot older, but we still didn't really talk about it openly because I think it was really humiliating to have to talk about that stuff and come back home and tell somebody that you were called a monkey or that you were called, you know, dirty because your skin was dark. And I know that I was embarrassed, even though I had no reason to be. But when you're faced with that every day, it's the shame just kind of like, you know, as a child, and you're just in fight or flight mode for pretty much all my
Absolutely.
childhood. So I was pretty much in fight or flight mode all of my childhood and learning how to survive and navigate and figure out how to avoid being hurt and position myself so that I could not be clumped into the same category of the vulnerable people, and figuring out how to stand up for myself and not stand up for myself, and having like, it was a confusing, it was an anxious time in childhood. But my roots then come from having to learn how to survive and recognizing all of the people around me who were also having to survive and feeling helpless as a child in terms of how to help myself and also how to help others. And that was just like preoccupied my head. It just
Yeah.
overrode everything. And my mission in life was, I have to be a change maker when I know how to figure out how. And so I was sort of driven into that direction, and I did women's studies in school and gender studies, and always with the race component, critical race thought, and found my way in working generally with women and women's health, and then
Mm-hmm.
really focusing on the realities. And this was after I moved to the US for school. I did manage to get into school here on a scholarship. I couldn't get into schools in my own country because of the racial quota. And so my community had like a small percentage of people that would be let in, and then the dominant community had, like, you know, full access to
Uh-huh.
universities. And then, you know, so it was, you were competing with a lot of people. Maybe I could have gotten in, but I just didn't feel safe in the system. And also, if I had gotten into school there, I would not have had a choice of where I was placed or what subjects I was to take as a person of my community. It's just like whatever seat is available, you can just get maybe funneled in if you even get in. So it was just a
Yeah.
very frustrating system. So I actually looked outside of the country, as did a lot of community members who were facing that kind of discrimination in my own country, that led a lot of people to seek a safer environment outside. Um, so a couple of friends and myself, a few of us, like, who were looking for a chance to just live with freedom and have intellectual pursuits that were where we wanted to be, landed up looking for places that offered scholarships for international students. And we had some guidance from people who had gone ahead of us and had given us some good advice about where to apply here and which colleges in the US, for example, were welcoming of international students and also offering a good financial aid package and scholarships. And that's how I eventually got here. To a college in Massachusetts, and that was back in 1989. And I did a lot of work in the community back then, mostly working on violence against women issues and labor rights, and then eventually immigrant rights, queer rights, and forming my own organization back then that focused on anti-oppression and anti-violence, focused on and centralizing the needs of people of color and immigrants. And then I moved over to California and happened to have known one of the former board members of PTV, who is from Colombia, and he is a theater person, and he did work very actively in theater of the oppressed. And I had met him during organizing work when I was in Massachusetts, when I was connecting with theater work as well as part of a way to engage with community. And Hector Aristizabal is his name. He now does global theater work. He is a survivor of torture himself. He was persecuted in his home country of Colombia, imprisoned. His brother, I believe, didn't make it. And Amnesty International, after like some years of his imprisonment, managed to get him out and safe into the US. And he was connected to PTV. He was running theater groups with PTV, and he's also a psychologist, so he was sort of like doing both. And I happened to meet him, and I kept connected with him when I moved to LA, because that's where he landed up being based, and knew about the organization. And one day, and I wanted to sort of get involved in any way that I could, but there were no openings for many, many, many years. And one day, after I had gotten my license, social work license, and taken the California exams, I was just perusing places that I could use my skills to volunteer, to do forensic evaluations, and happened to check on the website of PTV, and they actually had a clinical director position open. I was like, huh, wow, let me give it a try. And 5 years ago, and that's how I got in, and I'm here. And it's like a perfect spot to be in, and I love the community that I work with, and I'm passionate about the work, and it doesn't feel like work because I love it as it's almost like an art or a creative space or a community space where people can just belong in whatever
Yes.
way, shape, or form they are. And it's how I really truly believe we make social change, by not excluding people, but by being inclusive and having community together as part of the healing process. And
Yes.
boy, do we know that we all need to heal, whether or not we've been persecuted or tortured in our home countries, but just by virtue of being people of color, we need to heal too. And
Right.
yeah, and look what's happening now here in this country. I mean, not now, it's been happening for 400 years, but it's intrinsically related. There's no separating the experiences. People in this country have been tortured and persecuted for centuries and are not recognized as so. So
Yeah, that's such a you made a couple of good points that resonated with me. You know, when you were talking about how your family didn't speak of such things, you know, it just really shows the common trauma that people of color experience due to colonialism, and that occupation, whether of like that geographic space, that mental space, our physical space. It's the same regardless of where we reside. I have grandparents and great aunts who refused to talk about what they endured as children, or what their parents, you know, what they saw their parents endure, or even stories that might have been passed down. Like some of them just kind of refused to pass those stories on. There were relatives that did, you know, which is how I know, you know, my family story, both sides, and my daughter knows hers. But yeah, there is absolute trauma that occurs that organizations like yours help address. So I want to definitely dive into like what PTV does and all of that. But before we do that, I'd like to hear from Andrick. If you want to share with us, you know, your story, where your home country was, if it was the US, and how you made your way to PTV.
I would love to, Tanisha. Thank you for the space, first of all. In my case, it's always interesting, and I get to know Carol more and more every time she has an intervention. Yes, in my case, I am from Mexico, and I am an immigrant as well. Also a scholarship student in the US, but I'm gonna get to that. My main the main barrier through my childhood and the years after has always been gender. And as a victim of gender violence and a survivor of gender violence, I always lived with the mission and the idea to bring equality and to bring justice in the matters of gender. But when I came to the United States, that's when I learned, or I guess I lived racism before, and I understood the existence of racism. But it wasn't until I came to the United States that I was able to fully understand the magnitude of this problem. And as of this point, I think it's extremely important, being Refugee Day, the International Day for Refugees. It is national or international? Excuse my ignorance.
International from my research.
Okay, as it should be. Perfect. So being this date, I think it's extremely important to change the conception that people have in the US of immigrants from all over the world. Because educating about the nature and the struggles that refugees and asylum seekers face, not only in their countries, but once they come here in the United States. So that's something that PTV, it's pretty much, and the people at PTV are experts at, because the challenges that refugees and asylum seekers face within the US, it are layered amongst with discrimination towards the LGBT community, towards gender issues, and towards racism. So you put all of that together on top of the discrimination against immigrants and against people with different cultural backgrounds. So it is extremely important to educate people about this, and to educate people against this single story of immigrants, especially particularly as someone who came here and realized the limitations that exist for people from other countries and people from other races, from people of color, pretty much, within the capacities of how far can they take their success in their life. So that's extremely important, especially for me as someone who had the fortune, even though it is not very common in Mexico, and there is a small percentage of people who are lucky enough to achieve it, as someone who achieve a higher level of education, and as someone who was able to also, like Carol, get a scholarship and come and study at UCLA. I think it's extremely important for me to understand, to help people understand that immigrants come in all colors, sizes, and refugees face incredible challenges, and they deserve to have a dignified life and to have a safe place to live and thrive. That's my main point. and I graduated in performing arts, so I'm trying to use now with PTB, we're cooking this project. I'm trying to focus in using theater as a form of therapy. So drama therapy, it's going to be my focus from now.
That's nice. And I've been on a couple of PTB calls, and I've seen how different, I guess, approaches are used to help asylum seekers, you know, kind of find that space, find a peaceful place, and adjust. I'm wondering, when you immigrated here, you know, you were in search of a safe place. Were you, did you experience a different type of persecution in Mexico than, and how does it differ here in the US, what you're experiencing here?
To be honest, the type of prosecution is the same. The difference is the enforcement of the law that protects you from that kind of persecution. I've never been outside. I've never lived outside of California, which in here we have a very specific, a very advanced protection in terms of human rights, in terms of LGBT, in terms of gender rights, as well as well, I don't know. I don't know how I feel about California racism, but still, we are amongst the U.S. one of the most advanced states that are closer to achieving equality, even though we're still very far away. Yeah. So the excuses and the ideas behind discrimination, either because I am a person of color or because I am a gender non-conforming individual, are the same. And I given the violence that I've been able to witness during my time with PTB against transgender and against gender LGBTQ folks and friends that I've been able to witness, and right now the violence against people of color when during this process and protest and during this difficult time, it's telling me that the oppression is the same.
Yes.
There's just more regulation within the law. There's just more vigilance and community work facing this kind of oppression.
Yes. It's great insight. Thank you. Carol, I'd love to jump back over to you and ask for just kind of an overview of the services that PTB provides. And another thing that I'd love for you to share, that you shared with me when we first met, are I'd love for you to share the countries of origin of many of your asylum seekers. I was really surprised to see, because it's, again, being completely transparent, a lot of this is so new to me, but it was surprising and so informative to hear where all of your, many of your clients come from. So if you could just share those things, services provided, and where many of the asylum seekers immigrate from for safety.
So we, first of all, we're small. We're about 13 to 15 staff, 13 like full-time staff, and then a couple of like consultants and part-time folks. Well, that's not true. We have some. We have a core about 13 staff. Let's just say that. And then we have a team of interpreters and like cultural brokers that work with us, and we have a lot of those folks. We can't do our work without them. We provide, generally the main services that we provide are trauma responsive therapy and case management, helping people to kind of adjust and adapt to this new strange country that they're in. We do provide primary medical care, and the clinic that we partnered with is Eisner Family Health in downtown Los Angeles. And what makes our organization unique is that we provide the forensic, psychological, and medical evaluations and reports and testify in court um, to, to provide evidence on asylum seekers' cases. So as long as the asylum seeker comes in and has evidence of psychological trauma or physical wounds and injuries, we can document that in our own disciplines, whether it's medically by examining the wounds, taking pictures of them, and the doctor would be able to sort of describe, well, this is consistent with a wound inflicted by a blunt object, and it looks to be between 5 to 10 years old, or 2 to 3 years old, or fresh. And those are the types of things that can connect to the story of the asylum seeker that's being put forth about their persecution experience. And so we build the evidence. And psychologically, a lot of folks come in with post-traumatic stress, major depression, bereavement, grief and loss, just from having to unwillingly leave their homes and their comfort place, or places of, people that they love, and families and partners or children, to leave their homes and come to a strange land that they didn't really want to come to, but they had to. Otherwise, they might face continued sexual violence or death. So our job is to help people first find safety within, recognize that they're now hopefully safe. Policies in this country, especially in the last 4 years, haven't made it feel very safe at all. So it's a daunting task because policies are constantly changing, and this current administration has just been so anti-immigrant and so racist and so homophobic and transphobic that we're all struggling. It's a struggle, and we don't know whether we're coming or going. We don't know what the immigration courts are being mandated to do versus not. We don't know how they're going to rule, and it's just a very uncertain time. People are being barred from seeking asylum. People are being turned away at the borders. It's a strange time. It's unstable right now. So we try to provide that stability, safety, inform people of their rights, connect them to ways that they can survive and meet their basic needs here. Coming in and as an asylum seeker, you are entitled to nothing. No, no housing, no, no financial support, nothing. Not even work permits until, I don't know, 6 months after you've finally gotten all your stuff together to submit your paperwork.
And now they're changing that. They're trying to avoid giving work permits to asylum seekers,
right,
up until the process is done.
So that, and the process could take anywhere from 2 to 8 to 10 years to be done.
Yes, it could. The average is 4 years, actually. Yes.
And now, people that, and now during COVID, because the courts have actually kind of halted, and the asylum offices only now, as of last week or the week before, opened. All of those cases in the last 3 months have also been postponed, and those cases will be the ones that are going to be heard first. So everybody who's been waiting for the last 5, 6, 7 years will be waiting even longer to have their hearing date come through. So it's not easy to survive. People who come in as asylum seekers are not coming in as refugees in the technical sense. They are refugees, but refugees that have been designated refugees under the UN HCR actually get placed in a country, and there is like a system set up to resettle folks with housing and with job training and language training and some temporary, like very temporary, less than a year cash assistance, so that people can get grounded and get started and live an independent life. Asylum seekers are coming in like from the very beginning, and the asylum process is almost kind of like the refugee vetting process, but within the US. And it takes, like about 8 years sometimes to get.
So I know that there are different categories of like asylum, the actual refugee. I saw that there were different categories in that. What's the process to become a refugee? Like, how long did those individuals wait in their home countries before they were even given that status? And are asylum seekers' needs more urgent, or are they both equally urgent? Because it seems like if you're fleeing, I'm just curious about, how long each of these groups are made to wait.
So your sound is coming in and out. I don't know if
and why asylum seekers are made, because they're urgent need, but I'm also, I'll rephrase. I'll restate my question. So my question was, what's the difference between refugees and asylum seekers? Like, do refugees have just as long of a waiting period in their home country, and then once they finally get to the US, things are ended? Or are things just faster for those of that status? Are things just faster for them?
So refugees actually are in sort of encampment areas outside of their countries, because they had to flee their countries maybe as a result of war or famine or whatever it is, but they've left their home countries because it isn't safe. And so they go to a third country that has signed on to the refugee treaty with the UN, and that has agreed to temporarily hold people in, I guess, maybe refugee camps or spaces where they may be there for maybe up to 8-10 years. It really depends on how fast the processing is. And then from those refugee camps, the UN will designate, okay, randomly, sort of, this people will go to Australia, or this people will go to Canada, or this people will go to the US, or whichever countries have signed on to accept refugees. So that's probably like an 8-year process or more in the refugee camp. So it's not fun. And you've seen pictures of what camps look like, and some are better than others. There's a lot of like bad stuff happening in camps too. So it varies. Asylum seekers fled on their own and often come from countries that are not in like crisis.
I see.
Say for example, Syrians fled their country because of the violence and the wars that is going on. Many landed up in refugee camps. Some landed up just being outside of the country for a wide variety of reasons, whether it was work, or they were on vacation, or they came to visit someone, or they were temporarily in school, but they can't go back. Yeah. There's no way that they can go back. If they go back, they're going to get killed. So those folks, for example, may have to file for asylum in the country that they're stuck in
I see.
and ask for protections. Doesn't mean that they will get it, but they still have to now go through the whole process while being an asylum seeker, or somebody from um, the Congo, which is not in like complete crisis right now, may be fleeing because they're still being persecuted, and they may get into the U.S. On their own, or to Canada, or to wherever, and they would ask at the border, or ask at
Mm.
to say, let me in because I'm seeking asylum. It's not safe for me to go home. Or they get here, have a friend or somebody that takes them in, and then they file for asylum on their own with a lawyer or without a lawyer.
I see. And what do they do during that time that they're waiting? You and Andrew were saying that it could take years for the process, but even, up to 6-8 months to even get some type of a permit. So what is one to do while they're waiting, and how does PTV support them during that wait period?
That's probably the hardest time for most people. It usually, I'd say on average for PTV folks, it's about, I'd say 18 months to 2 years of that waiting period without the work permit. So we don't have a ton of resources, but we do try to provide people with uh, transportation support, like token. It used to be tokens, now it's tap card, um, grocery cards, food, so that people can sustain themselves. Sometimes we're able to help people with paying their phone bills, because it's really important for people to be connected and have a phone. You really can't even get connected to your lawyer or a doctor if you just cannot communicate with anyone. So some of the basic stuff we try to take care of. Housing, we don't have that at PTV. We don't have the resources, um, the funds for that, and in LA is super expensive. So we really encourage, or a lot of our folks, especially from Africa, start off being connected to some of the churches, the African churches that have um, taken voluntarily organized to sort of fold people into their
Right.
congregations, homes, and communities. And people are kind of couch surfing for a couple of years, 2-3 years. It's not fun. As much as people with good hearts want to take people into their homes, but having overcrowded homes, not enough space, no privacy.
Right.
It
Right.
can get awkward and tense. And
Yeah.
so we really rely on the communities, especially the faith communities, to continue to support. And we're trying to build. We have some relationships with churches in faith communities in the LA area that have been really wonderful in trying to mobilize their own congregations to take folks in.
Yes.
So, Andrique, do you want to add to that?
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Andrique.
No, I think you said it very, very clearly. I mean, what we do about housing is sometimes whenever we know that there is an opportunity that it's at a very accessible price, we try to reach out to our community and see who needs it, and somehow just pass the news. But yes, that's the one thing we haven't been able to kind of sort out. And
Yeah.
I think in this particular moment, having in psychological resources and access to therapy and mental health is extremely important, because this is the moment when asylum seekers and refugees are um, are missing home the most. They're jumping from one place to another. They don't have a stable housing. They are not getting the nutrition they need. They're going through this first 2 years are crucial, and that's why I think PTVE is that's where the value of PTVE lies the most.
And I forgot to mention like that part of what Enrique is bringing up is that actually the probably the biggest and most powerful part of the work that we do is the groups that we are running. Because as Enrique said, it's a very isolating time when you first arrive in this country and know nobody. And we offer these spaces, we hold these spaces for people to break out of isolation and begin to sort of make friends with safe people. At least we know that in PTV, everyone's gone through very similar life experiences, and it's very hard to explain that to people who've never gone through it before or feel like you can connect to somebody who hasn't gone through something as awful as you have,
It
or
it
face
also,
rejection.
oh yeah, sorry, Carol, to interrupt. It
Go ahead.
also creates a sense of community, especially for people who don't they don't have proficiency in the English language, and they speak, for example, French, or they speak, for example, Chinese. Sometimes they're able to find people who speak the same language, and they went through the same story. So it's creating an artificial family here to create a support system, if you want to call it like that. But I mean, it's extremely real. Sometimes it's more real than the family, but that's another story.
Yeah.
Yeah. Carol, what are some of the countries many of your asylum seekers immigrate from?
So we have very large populations of folks from, I'll name you like the main countries: Uganda, Cameroon, um, Mexico, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, Russia, and some of the Eastern European countries like Ukraine and others, um, Armenia, a lot of Armenians. And then we have a sprinkling of folks from the Arab countries, Saudi, Morocco, bunch of folks from the North African area, like Egypt, and a few Syrians, not that many in the Los Angeles and Orange County area. So our offices are in LA and Orange County. The Syrian community has mostly been resettled in the Central California area.
Okay.
Um, um, who else? At one point, we were getting a lot of folks from the Sikh or Punjabi community in India. Not so much anymore. 30% of our folks are LGBT folks, and of that, about 18% are trans or gender non-conforming. The languages that are spoken: Spanish, Luganda, Armenian, Russian, some French, Farsi. We have Iranian folks as well, Arabic, and then a sprinkling of Eritrean and Tigrinya, Ethiopian folks. I forgot to mention we do have a bunch of folks from Sudan, especially those that have that have been fleeing FGM or female genital mutilation of cutting, female genital cutting. So we've got families who have fled to prevent their children, their girls, from being subject to that kind of violence. We have a lot of moms that had faced that violence and fled as well. Didn't want their girls to go through it. So that's a tough one because there's a lot of medical complications that follow that for the rest of your life. So people get treatment here as well, through our doctor and some of the other specialized doctors in the community.
How, with such a diverse group, especially so many, and Andrew kind of touched on this earlier, but with such a diverse group, so many people of color, how has everyone been doing over the last 3 weeks in particular with the coverage of the George Floyd murder and all of the incidents that preceded that, the protests that have followed. How's everyone doing at this time?
So one of the things that we've always, well, at least since I've been there, we've always talked about openly is race issues, especially because our African folks are bumping up against it without having a lot of preparation of what it means to be Black in a US context.
Right.
And so they're experiencing from a very early time confusing situations that they've never really had to deal with when you're living in a monolithic Black culture of Africa, except maybe tribal differences or religious differences. But so it's maybe not completely unfamiliar, but the ability to screen and assess and notice what's going on with you may not be fine-tuned because you don't expect stuff, or you've just not had the experience here to kind of know what's going on, what's really going on. But through the groups, we've had some really, over the years, we've had some really both funny and enlightening and just great ways to express to each other what kinds of experiences people are having as Black people walking into white spaces or living in white spaces, and or even in Latino spaces. There's a Latinx spaces because there's a lot of Black brown confusion too. We've all got a lot of internalized shit. So we've been having open discussions. So when this recent uprising has been happening, we've been holding space at the groups, all of our groups, to really unpack what's going on. Many of our African folks have already been facing similar things, like being stopped by the cops or being pulled over while working and delivering pizza, whatever they're doing, being assumed to be a criminal and being pulled out of their cars and with like helicopters, and it's just they're experiencing it. They're experiencing it, and people are terrified of what it feels like to be driving while Black or just living while Black. And we process it, we unpack that, we talk about it as openly as we can. We talk about what does the relationship between Africans and African Americans is, because there is tension there as well, with unpacking history of African American, Black American history, so that Africans can understand the history of the people here and not misunderstand why things are the way they are. And also recognize maybe some of the privileges that you have as an African or immigrant person, where you might be welcomed into spaces and welcomed into economic spaces in ways that Black Americans are not, or Indigenous people are not. So it's important to raise that awareness so that potential rifts or misunderstandings or segregation of the communities doesn't happen.
Yes, that's sounds like very important work, and that there is a space provided for your community to really kind of process, understand, and learn is so important, you know, for all of America, but particularly for your group. So I'm going to be respectful of your time. I have one final question, and that is for you and Andrick. What is the one thing you'd like our audience to take away today on World Refugee Day? That's broad, I know. I'll start. I know one thing I would like our audience to take away. I'd like our audience to know how they can get involved and be active and show support. And I don't have the technical know-how to pin the PTV's button on the screen, but if you go to the website, there is a donate button right there. And if that's all that you can do, I would encourage listeners to do that. We've kind of heard the services that are provided to these people in need, and funding is needed. So that would be my hope for today's World Refugee Day, is that you find a way to get involved. And Carol, I correct me if I'm wrong, but your website is ptvla.org.
Mm-hmm.
I'll double check. I have a computer right here.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So again, ptvla.org. I would encourage everyone to visit that page, and there's a donate button right there. And there are other ways to get involved as well, which I've learned since meeting Carol just in January. This has definitely been a rewarding partnership and relationship that I've had with her and with PTV. And yeah, I don't think you'd be disappointed if this were one of the organizations that you chose to support. Is there anything else that you all would like to leave with us before we sign off?
Andrik, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I think mainly what's extremely important in order to create empathy and in order to humanize people of color and to humanize immigrants, to humanize refugees and asylum seekers, we need to, what I would like the audience to take on, it's to go and try to listen to the stories, look at documentaries, read books, listen to podcasts, listen to the stories and share them. Because it's lack of communication, it's lack of knowledge of where people are coming from. I bet from what you heard today, both of you, your idea of asylum seekers and refugees, it could change completely. And if we want to change the policies, and if we want to change the agenda and the political climate that is happening right now, we need to convince people of why this is necessary. And it's by getting to know the people behind the walls, on the other side of the story. So I will take that. Please share. Please start the conversation, and that's all we need, really.
Absolutely.
And I kind of don't know how to put it into words, but I think alluding to the same thing that Andrik mentioned is about, sometimes the term refugee or asylum seeker makes it seem very alien or like the poor refugee, like they're all victims. And and just having that term alone can kind of turn people into like helpless. Suddenly they have no identity, but the identity of, I don't know, a poor person fleeing and have no agency or no personality or no life or no talents or skill. It just becomes like, oh, I'm a refugee, I need to donate money to help those poor people. But that's not who people are. People are just like you and me and Andrik and Sarah, everyone. It's
Exactly, value and human
value
potential.
and skills and talents and agency and politically minded and fighters and strong and human rights activists and
resilient, very resilient,
contributors to not only their own countries but contributors to this country through running businesses or bringing their medical skills or their engineering skills or language skills or whatever it is, their acting skills, to this melting pot that is supposed to be this country, this pot of this country that is supposed to, that grew out of the migration of unwelcome people who apparently supposedly fake discovered it and then stole all the land from the indigenous people. But I mean, what gave them the right to be here and create conditions where people who look white can just easily migrate into this country, and those that don't are somehow not seen as human? So this is, I just want to take that.
Exactly.
Yeah, that this is regular people. These are people like you and me, and whoever we are, who can contribute equally, if not more, because that, as people of color, as Black folks, as Indigenous folks, as queer folks know, that experience of struggle, it blossoms wisdom and strength beyond your imagination that helps you to survive. If you are here and surviving as a Black person, as a queer person, as a person of color, as a new immigrant that's fled, you have strength that other people do not have. You have wisdom that other people do not possess. You have that inside of you, and that is what makes you brilliant.
That's the truth.
And we need to own that, and we need to push that narrative to the forefront. We are not less than. We are well more than. We are brilliant people.
Yeah. That that inability to see humanity in others is a major roadblock. And I do agree. I wish people could get past that. I've been on the PTV calls where, I've heard folks talk about, hey, I was an engineer in my home country and now I'm having to start from scratch. And this is how I'm to be able to do that. It definitely builds a strength that many Americans don't even have to. It's an experience that never affects them, for many. For others, it does, where they do have to start from scratch. And all of the, obstacles that one has to overcome to even get here to safety. And then once here, then figure out, how do I even remain safe in this space? So I thank you both for sharing those sentiments. I echo them. And I thank you both so much for giving us your time this afternoon. And thank you for educating me, even over these last several months. It's been a great journey, and I hope one that continues.
Thank you so much, Tanisha, for giving us this exposure and folding us into your community. And we are really excited to be able to keep working with you and in your team and see where we can move things.
Absolutely. Well, our chapter, Tau Beta Omega chapter of Alpha Kappa Alpha, is 60 plus women strong. We are individuals. We move as one unit. There's great leadership, and there are just great women just so eager to support. And that's just our chapter. There are over 1,000 chapters over the world. So we're excited and we're ready too. So I'm so thankful you returned my email in January.
Me too.
All right. Yes. All right. Well, you all have a great afternoon, and thank you for spending this World Refugee Day with me and with us. Saluda, is there anything that you'd like to? All right.
No, just thank you on behalf, as program chair. I really enjoyed listening to both of your stories and just giving me a different perspective that I can definitely share with others. And so again, we're just grateful for you being willing to share your journey. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah and Tanisha.
All right. Have a great weekend.
Bye.
You too. Bye.
Bye.